Hey guys, Sean here and welcome to the F1 Word powered by planetf1.com. Now the Singapore Grand Prix was packed full of action, drama and... No, sorry, they're the notes from a different script. It wasn't a classic, was it? And it won't be a race that many will be rushing to watch again anytime soon. However, although it wasn't a thriller, it did offer up a few interesting talking points. So here's a look at our winners and losers from the race in Singapore. As always, we'll kick off with a positive, and so our first winner of the race at Marina Bay is, rather imaginatively, the race winner. You're welcome. Lando Norris was absolutely dominant in Singapore. He conquered his never led from pole at the end of the first lap demon. There's got to be a catchier name for that than that. But he got the start he needed, led into turn one and never looked back. His early pace looked strong, but when asked to step it up a little bit, he did and disappeared even further up the road super quickly. An ominous moment for his rivals, as is the fact the gap could have been even bigger had he not taken it a bit easier towards the end of the race. It was the kind of drive that became synonymous with Max Verstappen last season in particular, but it wasn't just his pace that puts him on the winners list. The fact he proved he was able to control a Grand Prix from lights out all the way to the checkered flag despite a couple of bumps with the wall that on another day could have seen him on the losers list. But his gain of 7 points over Max Verstappen keeps his, depending on your view, slim or insanely realistic title chances alive. It is a tough ask on that note, given there are only 6 proper races and 3 sprints to go this season, and he has got to keep delivering these performances and results and hope Verstappen has a few rough weekends or that his teammate can take some points off the Dutchman if he's going to pull it off. But he did just about all he could in Singapore and brought home the points he needed to. A very strong drive and a result that has teed up the final 6 races very nicely indeed, and thankfully we don't have too much longer to wait for the next one. A month? What do you mean a month? Moving on, and our first entry on the losers list this week is probably somehow less surprising than putting the race winner on the winners list. Again, you're welcome. Daniel Ricciardo had a thoroughly miserable weekend at Marina Bay, which was preceded by extremely strong speculation that it would be his last race. So he needed one hell of a performance to make a statement, but that performance never came. Out-qualified quite comfortably by teammate Yuki Tsunoda on Saturday and spent much of the race towards the bottom end of the timesheets. Not helped by a suboptimal strategy, some might say again, but any potential excuses need to stop. He's had some very good drives since his return to F1 with the sister Red Bull team, no doubt about that, but they have been nowhere near regular enough, and he simply hasn't been hitting enough of those high points to convince the team to keep him on, let alone promote him to the main team, which was his goal when he made his F1 return. If it does turn out to be true that he is on his way out, something which may have already been confirmed by the time this video goes out and something which looks almost nailed on following his comments post-race and the guard of honour for him at RB, his final act for Red Bull was somewhat ironically to almost play the number 2 role to Max Verstappen by snatching the fastest lap point away from Lando Norris right at the end of the race. A point that could prove critical come the end of the season. Super quickly worth noting, Lauren McKee said in his post-race press release quotes that the decision to go for the fastest lap was made because, given it could be his last race, they, quote, wanted to give him the chance to savour it and go out with the fastest lap. Even so, last place thanks to a 3-stop strategy and the fastest lap of the race, something he doesn't even get a point for, is a sad way for his long and at times, especially during his Red Bull days, very successful F1 career to end. You never know what the future may hold, and with the Constructors' title now looking like a long shot for Red Bull and another break between Brazil and Vegas later this year, maybe it isn't all over for the Aussie. This is F1 after all, and anything can happen. For now, though, it looks like it is farewell to Daniel Ricciardo. Next up on our winners list is Max Verstappen. Yes, really. This might be a bit of a controversial pick given that he did finish nearly 21 seconds off the lead and of course dropped 7 points to his main title rival, but it could have been so much worse. In the lead up to the Singapore Grand Prix, all the talk was of McLaren versus Ferrari, as well as about how much most people expected Red Bull to struggle, especially when you look at their pace here last year. And after both Friday practice sessions, that seemed at least partly true when we saw the pace of the Ferraris and the McLarens. However, Verstappen put together a great lap to qualify on the front row and drove just as well on Sunday to beat those drivers behind him comfortably. Now, sure, others did drop the ball, and that absolutely played its part, for one Ferrari, but also Oscar Piastri, who, yes, drove well on Sunday, but put himself out of position in the first place after qualifying P5. But again, given the pessimism around their chances at Marina Bay, dropping 7 points suddenly isn't as bad as it had the potential to be. The phrase damage limitation really does feel rather apt right here. After all, he still has a healthy 52-point lead at the top of the standings, and the team is definitely more optimistic about their chances in the coming races. Plus, unlike the summer break, there is not a shutdown, so Red Bull can use this break to get some updates rolled out in time for Austin in a bid to try and solve their car problems. Back to the losers list then, and we've gone for Sergio, Perez. One way or another, this has all been rather Red Bull-centric, hasn't it? But that's just the way it is this time around. Things really looked on the up for Checo in Baku until the crash with Carlos Sainz, obviously. And there was just a glimmer of hope that maybe his performance up to that point would be the turning point of his season. But no, it was very much back down to earth with a bump in Singapore. He was knocked out in Q2 on Saturday and started down in 13th place whilst his teammate lined up on the front row. Of course, Verstappen extracted everything from that car and drove extremely well, and he is by far the better driver. But that is still a gaping chasm between them, and Checo should not be qualifying that far down when his teammate is so far up the order. Not the first time we've said that this season. What is really frustrating about his drive on Sunday specifically, though, is that he made a cracking start to get up to P10. And it looked like he was going to drag that car to a semi-decent finish at the very least. But again, no, he never made it any further than P10 and picked up just 1 point as a result, once again allowing McLaren to outscore Red Bull and, as they now sit top of the Constructors' Championship, extend their title lead. Frankly, it's just not good enough from Checo, and it looks as though Baku may well have been a one-off. That car absolutely has some big problems, no doubt about that, as Red Bull seem to be accepting, and Perez continues to struggle with it. But regardless, it was still a disappointing showing from him at a track he has performed well at in the past. It is probably a good job for Checo that Daniel Ricciardo hasn't been delivering the results he needs at RB, otherwise we might have spent the weekend talking about it being a different driver's last race. Our final main pick for the winners list is one of the drivers of the weekend, and that is Nico Hülkenberg. He stuck his Haas well inside the top 10 in qualifying, P6 to be exact, and was even within a couple of tenths of Oscar Piastri. He even spent a few corners ahead of the Aussie in the race following a very good start, but he was repassed quickly and ended up in 9th place come the checkered flag. Okay, 6th to 9th doesn't sound like a great result, but that car had no business being up there in the first place, and 9th place will likely have been the target given the top 8 places were always going to feature the top 4 teams. Although having said that, perhaps he'll be a tad disappointed that he didn't get an extra place as Perez was still behind him, so maybe his result didn't turn out to be the maximum available to him in the end. But that's not a criticism, because he drove very well to keep the likes of Alonso and Leclerc at bay for so long, and he did still finish ahead of Perez too, and thoroughly deserves the 2 points he grabbed for it. 2 points, by the way, that have now moved Haas to within striking distance of RB in the battle for 6th place in the Constructors' Championship. Just 3 points between them now, and on current form, you'd surely have to say Haas have got to be favourites to take it in the final 6 races of the season. Hülkenberg's performance, by the way, isn't a huge shock, really, given how well he's driven at times over the course of this season. And as we start to move into his final 6 races for the team before his move to Sauber, it's got to be said, given how well he has delivered for them and based on the here and now, Haas are really going to miss him in 2025. And the final main pick for the losers list is Ferrari. What a frustrating weekend it turned out to be for the team, and yes, indeed, Ferrari fans. As already mentioned in this video, Ferrari were expected to be the main threat to McLaren in Singapore, and their pace on Friday certainly backed that up. A promising start to their weekend that very quickly unravelled. The pace evaporated on Saturday, and with the tyres apparently losing temperature, Carlos Sainz crashing and Charles Leclerc's lap time being deleted, although it was a time that would have still only seen him qualify in 7th place, ultimately resulted in the drivers starting 9th and 10th on the grid, far from a threat to McLaren. In fairness, both drivers gave it everything in the race, with Sainz bouncing back to 7th place, and Leclerc did a fantastic job to jump up to P5 and split the two Mercedes drivers, so a good turnaround. However, even though it would have been tough to beat Lando Norris based on the form and pace he showed on Sunday, there is no doubt whatsoever that this one feels like a missed opportunity for the team, especially after showing so much promise early on. What does this do for their chances of beating Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship then? Well, it puts a little dent in it, but they were only outscored by Red Bull by 3 points. They have Checo to thank for that. So it's not a total disaster, and that fight is still alive for now. Again, though, one heck of a missed opportunity. Before we wrap things up for today, let's do the usual honourable mention for one extra loser and one extra winner. The honourable loser mention could well be a tad controversial, but we've gone with Alex Albon. Now, that is not to say that he drove badly. He qualified well in P11, although there was the feeling he and Williams could and should have been top 10, but he was still in a great position to potentially pick up points, so a good Saturday. In fact, off the line on Sunday, replay showed he was actually up to 9th place on the run to turn 1, so a decent start there, but being on the outside is always a risk at Singapore, and he ended up running wide and across the runoff area, which saw him fall through the field. Strategy looked as though it could have been good as well. He pulled the trigger on the undercut and his pace was good after he pitted, which meant he had a shot of moving back into a good position. However, unfortunately for Alex Albon, his Williams suffered power unit cooling issues and he retired the car. But with Franco Colapinto pushing him hard already and performing extremely well again in Singapore, as well as that retirement, of course, it's hard to call this anything other than a loss for Alex Albon. Let's end on a positive though, shall we? Our honourable mention this week is Fernando Alonso. It has got to be, surely. He did manage to outqualify the two Williams drivers, which is a bigger achievement than perhaps it sounds given the resurgence of that team and the decline of Aston Martin. He also drove extremely well on Sunday, deploying his pace where he needed to around the pit stops and got the maximum out of the car and the maximum result that was available to him in the race. Once again, he was the winner of the midfield. That car is not good, I think we all know that, and it was made to look even worse by Lance Stroll over the weekend in Singapore. But Alonso continues to pick up points at just about every opportunity and continues to impress. A fantastic drive once again. That is it for this one then, but what do you make of our winners and losers picks for Singapore? Who would you add or remove from our list? You can let us know that and your winners and losers in the comments section down below, and to catch up on all the latest Formula One news and reaction, head on over to planetf1.com. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean, this has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.